it's hard because this is a new possibility that didn't exist before. So there's no tooling, there's no process in working this way. And that's part of the reason like Agora exists, right? It's because we believe that this is like a fundamentally better way of building software. It's a more almost ethos wise more aligned with the original intent of the internet. But we never got to build these tools to support this way of working because it was not possible before, and that's what we're here to do.
None of the information in this podcast constitutes investment advice or an offer, recommendation, or solicitation by WAGMI Ventures or any of its affiliates to buy or sell any securities. Hey everyone, Benga here with another WAGMI Ventures podcast episode. Today we're going to be chatting with Yitong Zhang, co-founder of Agora, a cross-chain platform that offers a new standard of governance tools for decentralized protocols. For anyone who is new, this is the WAGMI Ventures podcast, where we do snapshots with interesting builders and founders across crypto and AI. Check out wagmiventures.io to learn more about the syndicate behind the podcast. All right, let's get at it. Yitong, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm just going to jump right in here and start with the number one familiar ask. You're certainly no stranger to building and executing in crypto, being a serial founder. So how did you get into crypto? How did this all start?
Yeah, great question. So I, like everybody else, started the opposite way of how you're supposed to do it, just that you bought a little bit of coins on the internet and then it starts going up and you're like, whoa, what is this? Why is it going up? I don't know anything about this. So because it's going up, you like reading about it. You're like, oh, what is this stuff? And for me, that was Ethereum in 2017. I remember distinctly, I was on a road trip to Yosemite, and then I just kept pulling out my phone to my friends, and I was like, this Ethereum thing is going up like crazy. Just in this car ride, it's gone up like X%. It's insane. So I was a degen, bought a little bit of ETH, and then started reading about Ethereum. I was like, oh, this is really freaking powerful, right? This is sort of like totally greenfield technology that is completely orthogonal to the way that business is done, that incentives exist in traditional technology. And it totally opens a new way of building technology companies and the kinds of applications we can build that is just radically different. And so I was super excited to build something on Ethereum. And this being in 2017, there really wasn't much to build. So I did a bunch of side projects and nothing really took off. And so I took a job at Coinbase.
Great context there. Absolutely can relate to coin investing in 2017 on Coinbase. I think for me, it was Bitcoin, Litecoin, and Ethereum. That was all that was available on the platform anyway.
And I was the specific thing that I was really hyped on building is some kind of CryptoKitties analytics dashboard, because I was really into CryptoKitties in 2017. It was the first popular NFT, and I was like, oh my God, I can build all these advanced analytics for people who are trading, breeding. It's going to be really great. And then the price absolutely tanked through the floor. And I was like, oh, I see. So this is how it's going to be, huh?
Yeah. And then you decided to go work at Coinbase and figure out what was really going on, and ended up spending 4 years there. Wow. I trust that was very formative. How did that time at Coinbase impact your crypto world view?
Yeah, I mean, part of the reason I joined Coinbase is that I looked around, right? And I was like, okay, I don't think that I'm actually able to build on my own anything that is the level of experience that I want to build today, right? If you think about it, it's I come from a design background. And so for me, it was really important to build real world applications that solve problems for real world people. And back then in 2017, there were so few things that you could do on chain. Really, if you look around, who was actually building in crypto, had real users, and solved a real user need? It was really only the exchanges, right? That was the only place that had sort of real users at scale. And so I knew that I had to go there and learn how they were building stuff. And so I got there pretty early. I mean, it felt late at the time. I was like, oh man, I'm almost there's already almost 300 people here. Oh my God, it's already after the 2017 a team bull run. I must be late. In retrospect, still early. And yes, learned a lot about sort of building consumer grade experiences. really sort of having a long-term view, right? The thing that would happen to every cycle is that like Coinbase would always feel like they're behind on every bull market, right? Every bull market you see, like 2017 was Binance, the next bull market was FTX. Coinbase would always be behind, but that's part of the reason is because they were not overly reactive. They were not overly greedy. They had a very long-term perspective. Like, look, we are building a crypto economy, and that's going to take at least 10 years. And so, like, maximizing leverage, maximizing exposure to shitcoin is not necessarily part of it is necessary to get on the promised land, but like we're not in a rush to like meet this kind of user demand because we believe that there is a larger 100x more important opportunity out there that we must build towards. And so I think just having that long-term perspective and building not just for the users of today, and of course you are building for the users of today always, but also the users of tomorrow is something that I think is really valuable. It's one of the things that like I think Coinbase, a lot of this is probably just Brian's conviction and fortitude has taught me a lot, and that's something that I value from my time there. There's so much more, of course, but I think that's probably one of the main things that I take away.
Yeah, and I think that has really helped to drive a lot of the thinking around how you build for a decentralized world and how you do that with intentionality, which I think has always been sort of like that Coinbase ethos. As we accelerate to as a decentralized world, it's important that we do it in an organized and the right way, and we have the right tooling and infrastructure for that. I think one aspect of that, of course, is governance. And even today, governance remains chaotic. Of course, I'm preaching to the choir here on that one, but this is how it comes into the mix, right? So tell me more about why you wanted to tackle this problem, like the governance, sort of organized governance, if you will, and what was your inspiration behind it?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is sort of this like long-termist perspective on crypto, right? Like, I think a lot of crypto has this sort of reputation of being fly-by-night pump and dumps, and there's certainly a layer of that. But there are also very many people here who are true believers, who are missionaries, who want to build decentralized infrastructure that will outlive them for the next 100 years, right? And one of the things with software is that like if you want to build software that lasts 100 years, that lasts as long as Ethereum will, hopefully, until the last node disappears, you are going to have to figure out your governance. I think there's sort of this naive perspective that like, well, like the easy answer is that we simply will not have governance. The code is immutable. It will never change. That's just pretty naive, right? If you look at sort of Bitcoin and Ethereum, yeah, Bitcoin and Ethereum, they have upgrades too, right? They might not have on-chain governance in the same way that like we understand at the application level, but they have consensus over what is the next version of Ethereum. The code changes all the time. There's functionality changes. And so a long-term survivable and important infrastructure must also be adaptable and changeable and requires a really thoughtful process around the change and the long-term management. And we looked around and it just didn't seem like a lot of teams were focused on this problem. A lot of times you'll see folks trying to solve this problem on an individual level where you run a very important protocol and then you're really incentivized to make it last for 100 years. And so you build some of the software, the governance software in-house, but the reality is that building your own governance software in-house is always going to be a second priority to investing in your protocol, which is always like going to take precedence. So although a lot of people are well-intentioned here, they just cannot find the resourcing to invest in their governance, even though it's really important. So our conviction is that like, look, everybody has to solve this problem if they're serious about being here for the long term. But you're right, it's really hard to solve this problem and it requires a lot of resource. So there needs to be a group out there that is committed to solving this on a horizontal level where a lot of this infrastructure that we build can be reused across different communities and different protocols so that we can build once and benefit the space as a whole every time, as opposed to folks rolling their own software in-house and then always sort of struggling to prioritize that.
Got it. Hey, everybody. Quick thing here. We're excited to announce WAGMI Advisory, your home for all things fundraising, hiring, and partnerships. This is all about supercharging your project with the WAGMI network, consisting of over 20,000 executives, investors, and builders in crypto, all ready to come alongside your project to help it succeed. Get in touch at team@wagmiventures.io to learn more and figure out if WAGMI Advisory is the right fit for your project. Let's get back to the show. And this conviction really is, I think, firmly around how folks transition from the way we used to do things in the internet era to more, the Web3 era. The governance is also like the thesis is also based on like token backed voting and collective governance, transitioning from private enterprise to common protocols that you see today. Can you juxtapose that against the internet Web2 era?
Yeah, certainly. I think this is sort of one of the things that to me is really exciting about crypto is it's the old sort of like USV fat protocol thesis, right? Is that like, look, we can build much more at the protocol layer on the like in Web3 because we have these like new primitives that sort of like create very powerful protocols that have incentives that drive their usage, and the protocols are owned by the commons. Like everybody has who has an economic stake, has a voice to participate in this. So that is really exciting, right? We have this unique opportunity to move a lot of the logic and value of the internet out of sort of these private companies and into these shared protocols that everybody can benefit. But that's not a given, right? Just because we can doesn't mean that it will happen. Already, like running private companies is freaking hard. So you're saying that like not only do we have to do things that are already difficult, we have to do it in the public, in the commons, in a way that everybody can align on. That is inherently hard, and it's hard because this is a new possibility that didn't exist before. So there's no tooling, there's no process in working this way. And that's part of the reason like Agora exists, right? It's because we believe that this is like a fundamentally better way of building software, like almost ethos wise, more aligned with the original intent of the internet. But we never got to build these tools to support this way of working because it was not possible before. And that's what we're here to do.
Awesome. I think as I think through everything you just said and what Agora is doing and how it's simplifying this governance process, I think inevitably there are other things that just happen organically, right? So by simplifying the governance process, it inevitably lowers the bar for community participation in that governance. It's definitely a solid value add and instrumental to the development and scaling of these communities, mostly DAOs, I would say. How are DAOs using Agora today? And with the increased participation, is there any area that they're looking to push you for further development? And feel free to sort of go into the broader roadmap here, if that makes sense.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think maybe one thing that I'll do here is just briefly touch on sort of this idea of token voting, which I think you mentioned a couple of times here. Look, I think a lot of people here has read the series of article that Vitalik posted around how terrible token voting is, and that we can't keep doing token voting because it's vulnerable to many sort of attacks and incentive problems. And that's true, right? This is sort of like a commonly understood problem with token voting. And there has been many attempts previously to just completely not do token voting at all and just simply move to a completely new system. And they've never worked. There's this really heavy center of gravity around the value of tokens. If you hold tokens in a project, you want to have a say around what the project does. And there's sort of this expectation that like you kind of have to start with token governance and then go through token governance to the other side where you have less and less token governance. That's part of our view on our roadmap too, right? Which is that like, look, the current meta is token governance, and we don't like it. Nobody likes it. We know it's not the correct meta, but in order to take us to the next meta, we have to ace the current meta, right? We have to do the best form of token governance possible, and then like start moving away from it as we're working to meet where users are, where communities are, and then starting to move them slowly away from this current meta. And so one of the things we think a lot about is, okay, well, if we just accept that we're in this token meta, how do we start building tools that like alleviate a lot of these problems that like Vitalik's articles identified and people have just like got realized over time engaging in this activity? How do we start like building things that like make the process 10% better here, 10% better there, 10% better over there? And as we build more and more of these things, we earn the right to our users' trust, to our community's trust, and we get to propose more radical changes, right? As they gain trust in our software and our team, and we'd be like, hey, we've been making these 10% improvements over the last couple of years. Here's one that is a 50% improvement, but has some risks and that moves away from token governance. And so that's the overall plan for us, right? Is to meet where users are, solve real problems immediately for them, and then over time pull them towards a non-token based governance model.
I was going to stay away from Vitalik's articles on token governance and avoid anything controversial there. But I'm glad you touched on it because it's important that we hear your viewpoint and understand that the position is really about meeting users where they are today and filling that immediate need. And in that light, how is Agora improving on-chain governance and fostering on-chain collaboration?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many low-hanging fruits once you start looking at how governance is done today, right? One example of this, a proposal today for on-chain governance can only ask a question in the format of yes or no. Do you agree with this proposal? But oftentimes, communities need to ask more nuanced questions, right? It's not like, hey, I would like to do this, yes or no. It's more like, okay, well, we would like to do this. Here's a couple of ways that we can do this. Which one is better? So that's not possible today on most of the communities. And one of the things that we did at Agora is okay, this seems like a really valuable way of operating your community and asking questions and sort of making decisions. So we should just implement a way to do multiple choice questions on chain where you can say, should we or should we not fund this area with 1 million tokens? We can ask, hey, do we want to fund this area with 1 million tokens, 500K tokens, 100K tokens, or not at all? And that suddenly just being able to ask multiple choice questions reduces the thrash in the community, sort of aligns expectations, reduces the work for token holders and voters. So this is the kind of stuff that we do. Other examples include sort of letting people delegate their voting power partially, right? So today, this is a really dumb thing, but if you have if you're a large token holders, you have to delegate all of your tokens or none of them. But oftentimes you don't want to do that, right? Because if you delegate all of your tokens to someone, that makes them really powerful. And so you might want to split your delegation across a couple of different people, which today turns out is not possible. And so one of the things we're doing is that we're implementing a change to make that possible. So many of the things we're doing today are pretty mechanical. They're, hey, these are just 10%, 15% better problems features that we're going to solve, very tactical problems for our users. And as we do a bunch of them, they're going to add up and just make it so that communities that run on Agora are just going to run a lot better.
Yeah, I like your mention of reducing the noise in voting. Sort of just touches on trying to remove any negative outcomes or at least reduce any negative outcome in that process. And I'm not sure if this is a fair ask, but would like to get your thoughts as you are thinking of building Agora. Are there any mechanisms or features that might help in preventing governance attacks?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the long-term answer to preventing governance attacks, there's a short-term, the long-term, and the very long-term. So let's start with the short-term. The short-term answer is that as your community is starting to decentralize in the early days, it's important to not go from 0 to 100, right? Because your community is not ready. You haven't developed a culture. You haven't developed expectations. Folks that aren't familiar with how things are supposed to go. And so in the early days, one of the things that Agora lets our customers do is we let customers decentralize, but also maintain admin control over specific parts of their governance and specific parts of the protocol so that they can engage in governance with their community in a way that sort of acts as a safety switch. So traditionally, the foundations and the labs entities operating these protocols have chosen not to engage in governance via direct voting because it has often been perceived as a conflict of interest or regulatorily risky. And that's reasonable. But what happens if there's something like a technically dangerous happening? What if there's something there's a mistake? A lot of these things are sort of just routine, human error that the foundations and the labs teams should be able to intervene on and say, hey, we're not overriding the will of the community, but what we're doing is that we're intervening to fix a bug or to prevent a security concern. And that is sort of what our powerful admin feature lets our communities do. In the long run, what we have to get to is obviously not a admin guaranteed security, but a community guaranteed security. And what that means is having a large community of folks who are engaged, who believe in your protocol, who are incentive aligned for its success, and are thoughtfully voting on proposals. So this means like making your delegates visible, giving them a reason to be engaged, giving them incentive to be engaged, and then growing your votable supply. And these are all things that our communities are focused on doing, and that our tooling is supporting that use case. And in the very, very long run, I think we have to move past a token voting model where the protocol decisions are made not by token holders, but by other mechanisms that are maybe inclusive of token voting, but not just based on token holdings. So one example of this is Optimism's dual house structure, where token holders and citizens check each other's powers and have to work together to make decisions and prevent capture. And that's something that we're working with Optimism really closely to implement.
That's fascinating. I really had no idea that could be an alternative feature or way of really addressing how you view governance. In some ways, I guess it begs the question, how are you ensuring it remains equitable? And I know this might be outside of Agora's scope, but it's how you think of the implementing the mechanisms. Like, does that question come up or in development?
Yeah, I think equitable is not necessarily the goal. Fair and legitimate is the
The
goal,
word I was,
right?
yeah, that's the
Yeah,
word
yeah,
I
yeah.
was looking for there.
Yeah. So, and fair and legitimate is sort of like up to like interpretation frequently, where like your definition of fair and legitimate might not be my definition of fair and legitimate. Actually, let me take that back. I think legitimate has a generally accepted definition, and the fair is it depends on what your community values and sort of like how you decide fair. Legitimate is sort of like a consequence of transparent, like a process that people understand, that people find transparent, inputs that people find like understandable, right, and transparent. So I think building legitimacy into the decision is a lot about sort of building a system that sort of like is understandable for most people. You might not agree with the decision and outcome, but you would not challenge the way that a decision was made. I think that's sort of one thing that's really important in Agora is like even if you're on the quote unquote the losing side of a vote, you would not be happy, but you also wouldn't challenge the legitimacy of the whole system. That's really important. That's part of what we do, right? This is part of the reason that it's really important that our software is sound, that our process is transparent, that anybody can go and audit our code, and everything is open source. As for fair, I think that depends on how the communities want to call fair, right? Like fair in many ways is sort of a function of the distribution of your tokens and voting balance. Is it fair for there to be some token holders that are like 1,000x more powerful than other token holders? Maybe. It depends, right? Like, perhaps like these like larger token holders have 1,000x more skin in the game, so maybe they should have 1,000x more say. Or other communities might decide that like actually no, like it should be one person, one vote. This is all like all of these systems are choices that the communities make when using Agora. They can use an NFT where everybody has one vote, or they can use an ERC20 where like people's voting balances are wildly different, and that's okay because it's based on the skin in the game they have. So different communities define that differently, and this is not something that we have to define for our users as long as we uphold the legitimacy of the process itself.
Right, which is the part of the equation you actually answer from an infrastructure view. So that's totally makes sense. Tell us what else excites you in crypto.
Yeah. I mean, oh boy. I think I like everybody else. I really love how prediction markets have really taken off this cycle. I was a huge fan of Augur back in the day, but like there was never any volume, nothing really happened. I built like a Augur front end as a side project one time and it just didn't there was nothing to show. But, like but how Polymarket is taking off, to me that's super exciting. That's one. More on the infrastructure side, I'm really excited for us to be in a world where like we're not there yet, but we're getting close to be able to build consumer grade experiences in crypto. And I think the components that go into that are one, Ethereum scaling via L2s. We're not quite there yet, but like we're getting pretty close to zero gas fee on L2s. Obviously, it's not fully zero, but it's low enough that many applications will be able to afford to sponsor the gas fee for users. And then the speaking of sponsorship, I think the other thing that's really exciting is sort of like smart accounts, smart wallets, whatever you want to call them, having programmatic wallets that can implement logic for users that like abstract away a lot of the pain of like self custody is really exciting too. And so I think when you combine those two things, if you squint a little bit, it's possible now to build like applications that are equivalently good in UX to normal non-crypto applications, which definitely was not possible before. It's still much harder, and that's why you don't see very many of these things out there in real life, because it just takes so much work to build something that would be 10 times easier on Web2. But the fact that it's even possible now, it's a minor miracle. Sorry, it's a major miracle. And so I think the what we have to go to next is that given that these things are now difficult but possible, we now have to make them simple and possible. And I think that's within reach as well. I just will take time, but I think the roadmap for all of this stuff is clear. And so I'm optimistic about that.
I think for me, especially prediction markets, which I think you sort of set yourself up nicely for. So any alphas that you want to give us on the show for directionally where you're thinking on prediction markets?
I don't trade much, so I wouldn't be able to give you any good plays. I'm more a consumer of the outcome of prediction markets. Happy to just know the truth, or as much of the truth as the market is willing to give me. And unfortunately, don't trade as much, and so don't have that much alpha to give them. Probably market.
Yeah, no, totally makes sense, and I hear you loud and clear on that one. Yitong, I gotta say thank you so much for making the time here with us and our listeners. Extremely valuable insights. Great project. Happy to stay close and continue to support.
Thanks for having me. It was great to chat.
All right. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, go ahead and give us a good 5-star rating and subscribe wherever you're getting your podcasts so you can get all the latest conversations from the most interesting founders, builders, and investors from across the world. Thanks so much and have a good one.